It sounds like I'm actually doing good. Oh, what was that? Oh dear.
Checkpoint.
Oh, I got a checkpoint. Oh. There. It sounds like I'm actually doing okay. Good evening and welcome to another edition of The Boogeyman. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the new Netflix movie starring Sandra Bullock, Bird Box. In the wake of an unknown global terror, a mother must find the strength to flee with her children down a treacherous river in search of safety. Due to unseen deadly forces, the perilous journey must be made blindly. The film follows a mother and her two children, named only Boy and Girl, as they try to reach safety in a world inhabited by beings that drive anyone who sees them into a fit of suicidal frenzy. Starring Sandra Bullock, John Malkovich, and Machine Gun Kelly. Yes, seriously. And directed by Susan Bier. Bier? The film flashes between three time frames. The build-up as the creatures begin to appear, the mother struggles alone with her children down the river as she tries to make it to safety, and a time in between when a small society of survivors struggle to retain their humanity and survive an increasingly insane world. One of the things I thought was interesting about Bird Box is that I have to actually grade it in two different manners. One is the manner in which it works as a thriller, and another in terms of how it works as a horror. Now, the reason I have to do that is because I actually really liked the film, but I found that the horror elements in the film explicitly didn't actually really work to get under my skin quite as much as I would have wanted. I find it hard to necessarily fault it for that, for the specific reason that very few movies that I watch actually end up scaring me. Like, I jokingly call myself at an expert level of horror, and what I mean by that is I watch so many different horror films, especially things that are extremely transgressive, like a Serbian film or Salo and things like that, where it's really hard to watch a film that doesn't at least try to get under my skin. And that's one of the things I thought was interesting about Bird Box, is it always seemed like you would approach horror in a really interesting way, but never quite get to the aggressive, visceral parts, with the possible exception of the introduction where, with spoiler alert, things go down. Within the first 10 minutes of the film or so, we have Sandra Bullock running in the streets while chaos is ensuing all around her. But I really feel like just the lens never zooms into anything that really serves as teeth. I feel like everything that I had seen in the film was like a little bit like a pulled punch, where they approach something scary and said, well, we don't want to go too far. And I consistently wanted them to go a little further, be it a little gorier or a little darker, just a little more. One of the interesting things is I found a quote from the director Susan Bier in which she says explicitly, "I did not want it to be a horror film. I did want it to be a thriller. I did want it to be emotionally engaging." Now, that being said, when I said earlier that I kind of have to give it two different ratings and one being a thriller rating, is I actually felt like if you remove the genre of horror from this review, and if you review it as a thriller, it actually really kind of goes up a few notches. The performances were really great across the board. Sandra Bullock was great. John Malkovich was great. I was actually quite surprised to see him in it. And everyone really felt real and sympathetic. I liked all of the characters throughout, even if they were kind of cursory, and there's a couple characters that you didn't really learn a whole lot about them before they, died. But I still liked them from what little I had seen. Now, I can't help but feel like another thing to mention, and this might be a little bit of kind of a surprise addition to this review is that immediately upon finishing the movie, I had realized, and this is how many books I buy on a regular basis, I actually had the book and I didn't even notice. I didn't know. I just ended up buying at my local bookstore. I ended up just kind of devouring everything that they have in the horror section, bringing it home, and then just kind of getting to it when I get to it. After watching BirdBox? After watching BirdBox on Netflix, I had realized that I actually had the book. And I started reading it, and one of the things that struck me immediately is how much darker the book actually is. Like, as I was saying for the movie, where I felt like they were pulling punches, I felt like Josh Malerman, the writer of the book, I felt like he actually didn't pull the punches. I don't want to spoil too much for anyone who enjoyed the movie and wants to read the book, but suffice to say that it actually lives in the horror genre a little bit more comfortably than the movie, in the respect that, you know, there's quite a bit more stuff that goes down. There's quite a bit darker elements to it. And even some of the comedy is kind of stripped back. That's one of the things that, looking back from the book to the movie, I find interesting is the movie had a lot more lighthearted elements, and it really felt like it wanted you to kind of love every aspect of it and be comfortable, and that's why I couldn't really rate it highly as a horror. To me, horror is a genre that doesn't want you to be comfortable. It wants to surprise you, it wants to shock you, it wants to really get under your skin and just kind of stay there. And I never felt like the filmmakers really wanted to do that. Now, is that to say that I didn't like the film? No, I actually really loved the film. But I have to actually, in my head, consider it a thriller to like it. Whereas the book, I felt, it doesn't have that limitation. You actually can enjoy this as a horror novel. It's not necessarily the scariest horror novel, but one of the things I found interesting is that it actually plays with the psychological elements a lot deeper than the film actually does. There's a moment in the book, I'm going to try not to spoil too much, but there's a point in the book where they're deciding whether or not to trust someone, and this happens in the film as well. And they're in the film, they kind of have these beats, and then they just kind of proceed further. Whereas in the book, they really linger and play with that, and they actually make it kind of feel a little bit like the psychological elements that happened in the movie The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, where you had these group of people that didn't know whether or not to trust each other, and that really built tension. And it's kind of interesting that they didn't build a tension quite as much or spend as much time building tension in the film. If I had to go back and rate Bird Box, like I said, I kind of have to give it 2 ratings. As a thriller, I would give it an A+. I adored all of the actors. I felt like there was a real compassionate composure to all of them. Like you get the sense the filmmakers really wanted you to feel for everybody. But on the other hand, they really didn't match that with any sort of very visceral attack on any one of them. Obviously, they're in peril. There's a thrilling element to it, but there's never quite an emphasis on the horrific. As a thriller, I give it an A+, but as a horror, I hate to say it, I have to give it like a B- or a C, because it just never horrified me. In comparison, I have to actually give the book an A+. I'd highly recommend this book. In fact, I wanted to do this review specifically to really promote the book, because I feel like if you did like the movie, you will love the book. I really feel, especially if you're a horror fan and you kind of felt like the same way that I did, where they kind of pulled punches and they didn't really quite go as visceral as they could have, the book kind of undoes all of those negatives that I can offer it. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about was the Bird Box challenge. Is this idea that you can actually run around blindfolded and participate in society in a functional way. You can't. You just can't. Please, society, stop making me say things like that. where I shouldn't really have to tell you not to go blindfolded and trying to drive a car. In fact, just to prove my point, I'm going to actually try to drive the Carmageddon. And let's see what'll happen. I think my camera actually went out. So we'll end there. So now let's take a look at what happens when you try to drive blindfolded. Okay, so I had to start my screen capture software and all that unblindfolded for obvious reasons. But now that I'm into the game, it's loading up. I'm gonna put on the blindfold, and then we're gonna see how well this does once we start. Okay, yeah, here we go. Just gonna make sure my controller works. As long as she does.
Hey, you!
Okay, here we go. Put it on the blindfold. Let's see here. Okay. There we go. It sounds like I'm actually doing good. Oh, what was that? Oh dear.
Checkpoint!
Oh, I got a checkpoint. Oh. There. It sounds like I'm actually doing okay. I don't hear any crashes anymore. That's a good sign. Oh. Hey, well, I think I played long enough to see how I did. So I'm gonna take my blindfold. Stop the recorder, and then I will play that back to you, and we'll see how well I did. See you there.